The Millionaire's Untamed Love, a forbidden romance that changed everything. Welcome to Alcott Stories, a heartfelt message for my lovely family. Hello, my beautiful Alcott Stories family. I hope you're all doing amazing. First and foremost, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for watching, for listening, and for sharing these stories with me. You are not just viewers. You are my sweet family. Without your love and support, this journey would be meaningless. Every like, every comment and every share fills my heart with happiness, and I can't express how much you all mean to me. But my lovely family, I noticed that many of you are watching but not subscribing. If you enjoy these stories and want to be part of this growing family, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Also, I would love to know, from which country or city are you watching? Tell me in the comments. Let's connect and make this family even stronger. Once again, thank you, my amazing Alcott Stories family. Keep smiling, keep dreaming, and I'll see you in the next story. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hunt Enterprises. From the 50th floor, Alexander Hunt stood with his hands in his pockets, gazing at the twinkling lights below. It was a world he had conquered, a world where power meant everything. Tall, broad-shouldered, and devastatingly handsome, Alexander was the kind of man who commanded attention without speaking a word. His ice-blue eyes, sharp jawline, and tailored Armani suit made him irresistible. But beyond his wealth and looks, it was his aura of control that made people either fear or worship him. Women adored him. They competed for his attention at every gala, every high-profile event. His dating history was filled with models, actresses, and heiresses, all flawless, all white. To him, love was an equation, a well-thought-out business strategy. He preferred a woman who could complement his public image, a woman who fit into the world he had meticulously built. And brown-skinned women. They had never been part of his equation, not because he harbored any ill intent, but because they simply weren't his type. His preferences were clear, his choices unwavering. He liked what he liked until the night everything changed. That night the office was unusually quiet. Most employees had left, and the air carried the faint hum of the city below. Alexander leaned against his desk, loosening his tie after a grueling board meeting. He glanced at the time. 10:15 p.m. He was about to leave when a knock echoed through the vast modern office. "Come in," he said, not looking up. The door opened, and the faintest hint of something exotic, vanilla, jasmine, and a touch of something dangerously intoxicating drifted toward him. His fingers tightened around the edge of his desk as a woman stepped inside, holding a stack of documents. She was different. Alina Ray. His assistant had mentioned her before, one of the new recruits from the finance department, but he had never paid attention until now. Her skin, a rich shade of bronze, glowed under the soft office lighting. Her dark, wavy hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that was both fierce and feminine. Deep brown eyes met his with quiet confidence, and full lips, painted with a subtle gloss, curved slightly as she approached. "Mr. Hunt, I was asked to deliver these reports before the morning meeting," she said, her voice smooth, almost melodic. Alexander forced himself to breathe. This was new, unexpected. He was rarely taken off guard, but something about her presence unsettled him. It wasn't just her beauty. It was her poise, the way she moved, as if she belonged in any room she stepped into. He took the documents, but when their fingers brushed, something electric pulsed through him. His grip on the papers tightened. He shouldn't have reacted. He never reacted. Alina didn't seem affected, or maybe she was just better at hiding it. She stood tall, waiting for his acknowledgement. Alexander cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Ray." He expected her to leave, but instead she tilted her head slightly, her eyes scanning him with a quiet curiosity. "Long night?" His lips quirked. Few people dared to engage him in casual conversation. "You could say that." "You should get some rest," she said, her tone light yet sincere. "You look like someone who doesn't slow down." Something about her words caught him off guard. Most people saw him as untouchable, invincible, yet she spoke as if she saw through him, as if she could sense the exhaustion beneath the polished surface. Before he could respond, she turned to leave. But Alexander did something he never did. "Alina." She stopped, glancing over her shoulder. His voice had come out lower, rougher than he intended. The way her name rolled off his tongue sent an unfamiliar thrill down his spine. She arched an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Hunt?" For a second, he hesitated. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say. He only knew he didn't want her to walk away just yet. But he was Alexander Hunt, always in control, always rational. He exhaled and forced a composed smile. "Good work." A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. "Good night, Mr. Hunt." And with that, she disappeared through the door, leaving behind a lingering scent and a man who, for the first time in his life, questioned everything he thought he wanted. Alexander sank into his chair, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He had built a world that was untouchable, but for the first time, it felt like someone had found a way in, and it thrilled him. The city outside was alive with a million lights, but inside Alexander Hunt's office, a deep stillness lingered. The night had stretched longer than expected, filled with back-to-back meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and endless reports. His tie hung loose around his collar, the top buttons of his shirt undone. He leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temple, exhaustion creeping in. Then a soft knock, his brows furrowed. At this hour, most of his employees had already left. He wasn't expecting anyone. "Come in," he called, his voice smooth but laced with authority. The door eased open, and before he even saw her, he felt her. A scent drifted through the air, something warm, exotic, and dangerously intoxicating. A mix of vanilla, jasmine, and a hint of musk. It wasn't overpowering, but it wrapped around him like a whisper against his skin. His grip on the whiskey glass tightened. Then she stepped inside. Alina Ray, the woman who had been haunting his thoughts since their last encounter. She walked with effortless grace, her fitted dress hugging curves that were neither exaggerated nor understated. Just perfect. Her deep brown skin glowed under the dim office lighting, smooth and flawless. Those dark eyes, intelligent and unwavering, locked onto his. She wasn't intimidated by him, not like the others. Alexander straightened in his chair, forcing himself to focus. He was a man of discipline, of restraint. He thrived on control. But the moment she stepped closer, he felt something raw stir inside him, something forbidden. "Mr. Hunt," she said, placing the documents on his desk. "These are the financial reports you requested for tomorrow's board meeting." Her voice was low, rich, carrying an unintentional sensuality. Or maybe it was just him. Maybe everything about her was starting to affect him in ways he wasn't prepared for. He should have just taken the papers and dismissed her. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You're working late." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "So are you." A slow smirk tugged at his lips. "That's different." "Because you own this place?" she asked, an amused glint in her eyes. A chuckle rumbled in his chest. She was sharp. He liked that. Her fingers lightly grazed the documents as she slid them toward him. And that's when it happened. Their hands touched. A spark. Quick but undeniable. Alexander's breath hitched. It was subtle, but it was there. The warmth of her skin against his sent an unexpected jolt through him. He told himself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. But as he looked up, their eyes locked, and suddenly, it wasn't nothing. His gaze traced the delicate curve of her face, down to her full lips that parted just slightly. His body tensed. There was an unspoken challenge in her eyes, as if she knew exactly what was happening between them, but refused to acknowledge it. Damn. He should say something. End this moment, before it became something more. But he didn't. Instead, he let the silence stretch, thick with tension. Alina didn't fidget or look away. She simply stood there, unwavering. And that intrigued him even more. "You should go," he finally said, but his voice lacked the firmness he intended. For a second, she hesitated, her lips curving in the faintest hint of a smile. Then she stepped back, creating distance between them. The scent of her still lingered. "Good night, Mr. Hunt." And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving him gripping the armrests of his chair, his pulse slightly erratic. As the door clicked shut behind her, Alexander exhaled a slow, controlled breath. He was in trouble, because for the first time in his life, he wanted something, someone he wasn't supposed to have. And the worst part? He had a feeling she knew it too. Alexander Hunt was a man who prided himself on control. Every decision, every movement, every thought calculated, precise, intentional. He ruled his world with an iron grip, leaving no room for distractions. And yet, Alina Ray was becoming the one thing he couldn't control. Days passed, but the memory of her scent, her gaze, the way her fingers had brushed his, lingered like a haunting melody. He tried to ignore it, convinced himself that it was just a fleeting attraction. But he was lying to himself, because every time she walked into the office, his pulse quickened. Every time he heard her voice, something dark and forbidden stirred inside him, and worst of all, he found himself watching her. It started subtly. A glance from across the conference room, a quick look as she passed his office. He told himself it was nothing, just harmless curiosity. But soon it wasn't enough. He needed more. One evening, as the last of the employees filed out, Alexander remained at his desk, pretending to be occupied with work. He knew she was still here, her soft footsteps down the hallway, the occasional sound of her keyboard clicking. At exactly 9:47 p.m., she stood up from her desk, stretching slightly, before gathering her things. He watched as she walked past the glass walls of his office, unaware of the way his gaze followed her every movement, the sway of her hips, the way her hair cascaded down her back, the effortless confidence in her stride. Damn! She reached the elevator and pressed the button, waiting. Alexander clenched his jaw. Walk away. Go home. Forget this. But instead, his body moved before his mind could stop it. He rose from his chair, adjusting his tie as he stepped out of his office. The sound of his expensive leather shoes echoed against the marble floors as he approached her. Alina glanced up just as the elevator doors opened. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, curiosity, and something else. She stepped inside. He followed. The doors closed, sealing them in together. Silence, heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Alexander could feel her presence beside him, close but not close enough. The scent of vanilla and jasmine wrapped around him like a drug. His fingers curled into fists. She was just an employee. This was just a normal elevator ride. Then why the hell was his heart pounding? The air between them grew warmer, charged. He could sense her shifting slightly, as if aware of the energy crackling between them. His jaw clenched. He needed to say something, anything, to break this spell. Instead, the words that left his mouth were darker. "You're dangerous," he murmured. Alina turned her head, her brown eyes locking onto his. "Excuse me?" His gaze dipped to her lips before snapping back up. "You heard me." A slow, knowing smile touched her lips. "And why is that?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because you're driving me insane. Because I want you in ways I shouldn't." He didn't say any of those things. Instead, he forced a smirk. "You're distracting." Alina arched an eyebrow. "Is that a complaint, Mr. Hunt?" The way she said his name sent a thrill down his spine. The elevator came to a stop. The doors slid open. Alina stepped out first, pausing just briefly, before turning her head over her shoulder. "Good night, Mr. Hunt." Then she disappeared down the hallway. Alexander exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the elevator railing. This wasn't just curiosity, it was obsession. And it was getting dangerous. The grand ballroom of the Carlton Hotel was draped in elegance. Chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, their golden glow illuminating the sea of elite guests dressed in the finest designer gowns and tailored suits. The air was thick with laughter, clinking champagne glasses, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume. Alexander Hunt stood near the bar, whiskey in hand, exuding effortless dominance in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He was used to being the center of attention, to having women subtly, or sometimes boldly, competing for his gaze. But tonight, none of them held his interest, because she was here, Alina Ray, and she looked breathtaking. His grip tightened around his glass as she stepped into the ballroom. Her gown, a deep crimson, hugged her curves like it had been sculpted just for her. The silky fabric cascaded down, pooling elegantly at her feet. A delicate slit ran up one side, revealing smooth, golden-brown skin with every step she took. Her hair was swept to one side, cascading in loose waves, exposing the graceful curve of her neck. And her lips, painted the color of temptation, parted slightly as she smiled at something someone had said. Alexander felt the heat rise in his chest. She was utterly captivating, and completely off-limits. For days he had tried to push her from his mind, tried to convince himself that his attraction to her was temporary, a distraction, nothing more. But now, watching her move through the room with effortless grace, he knew the truth. This wasn't just attraction, this was obsession. His jaw tightened as he watched her from a distance, sipping his whiskey, pretending not to care. But then, his patience snapped, because someone else had noticed her too. A tall, dark-haired man in a sharp navy blue suit had approached her. Alexander recognized him instantly. Ethan Carter, an arrogant young entrepreneur known for his relentless pursuit of beautiful women. And right now, his sights were set on Alina. Alexander's blood ran hot as he watched Ethan lean in, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. He said something, making her laugh softly. Something primal twisted in Alexander's gut, a slow, burning jealousy. He wasn't the kind of man who got jealous, but watching another man touch Alina, that was unacceptable. She wasn't his, but God, he wanted her to be. With calculated steps, he moved through the crowd, his body tense with an unfamiliar possessiveness. He barely registered the people who greeted him, offering polite nods as he passed. His eyes were locked on one thing, her. And then, as if she sensed him, she turned. Their gazes collided across the room. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. Damn. She had to know what she was doing to him. She had to feel it too, the pull, the unbearable tension that had been building between them for weeks. Ethan's voice pulled her attention back, but it was too late. She was his now. Alexander reached them within seconds, his presence looming, powerful. Ethan glanced up, instantly recognizing the man who controlled half the city. "Mr. Hunt," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." Alexander didn't even glance at him. His focus was solely on Alina. "You're driving me insane," he murmured, his voice dark, rough, meant only for her. Alina's breath hitched. Ethan frowned, sensing something unspoken passing between them. "Am I interrupting something?" "Yes," Alexander said bluntly. The tension in the air thickened. Ethan hesitated before forcing a chuckle. "Well then, I'll leave you two to whatever this is." With a last glance at Alina, he stepped away, disappearing into the crowd. Alexander barely noticed, because now it was just the two of them. The music swelled in the background, the hum of the party fading as he stepped closer. Alina arched an eyebrow. "Possessive, are we?" His fingers brushed against her waist, a touch so light yet searing. "You have no idea." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, her dark eyes searching his. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Hunt." His grip tightened just slightly, just enough to make her shiver. "I don't play games, Alina." His voice was lower now, rougher. "And if I did, I'd win." Silence stretched between them, charged, electric. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted a hand and traced his fingers along the side of her arm, down to her wrist. Her pulse was racing. He felt it. So was his. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a battle of restraint. The world around them blurred, the music, the people, the noise, all of it fading into nothing. She could end this now. She could walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "You shouldn't want me." A dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. "And yet, I do." His hand lingered on her wrist a second too long before finally, he let go. But the damage was already done. They both knew there was no turning back now, because this was no longer just forbidden desire. This was the beginning of something unstoppable. The city was alive with the glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic, but inside the penthouse suite of the Grand Royal, an intoxicating stillness lingered. Dim candlelight flickered, casting shadows against the luxurious silk-draped walls. A chilled bottle of wine rested on a polished table. Two glasses set beside it, one untouched, the other waiting. Alexander Hunt stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze lost in the cityscape. His reflection stared back at him, composed, powerful, but beneath a surface. A war raged. He had never done something like this before. Secret meetings, anonymous invitations, these were not his style. He was a man who made rules, not one who broke them. But with her, everything was different. Tonight, there were no boardrooms, no office doors between them. Tonight, he had set the stage for a confession, one that had been building inside him since the night she first walked into his office. And now, all he could do was wait. Alina stood outside the Grand Hotel, her fingers curled around the small, elegant card that had arrived hours ago. No name, no explanation, just an address, a room number, and a time. She'd known exactly who it was from. Every instinct had told her to throw it away, to pretend she never saw it. But she didn't, because the truth was, she had been fighting the same battle he was. She exhaled a shaky breath and stepped inside. The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent, yet her pulse thundered. This was reckless. This was dangerous. But it was inevitable. The moment she reached the door, her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the soft beep of the keycard as she pressed it against the scanner. The lock clicked open, and then She stepped inside. The door whispered shut behind her, sealing them in together. The room smelled of fresh roses, rich cologne, and something darker, something purely him. Alexander turned. The moment their eyes met, the air shifted. The space between them shrank, even though neither had moved. "You came," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Alina swallowed. "I shouldn't have." A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "And yet, here you are." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then he took a step forward. She tensed, but she didn't retreat. He was close now, so close that she could feel the heat of his body, see the slow rise and fall of his chest beneath his perfectly fitted black dress shirt. The top buttons were undone, revealing just a hint of the sculpted muscle beneath. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But I need you to be," he confessed. The rawness in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. She'd seen him in control, seen him command rooms with nothing but a look, but this was something else, something dangerously real. Alina's breath hitched as he reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist, a touch so light, yet it burned through her like fire. "Tell me to let you go," he murmured. She should turn around and walk away before this went too far, before she lost herself in something she could never take back. But she didn't. Instead, her eyes flickered to his lips. And that was all the answer he needed. With a sharp inhale, Alexander closed the distance between them. His touch wasn't rushed. It was slow, reverent, as if he was memorizing the moment, as if he needed her just as much as he hated himself for it. The city lights glowed behind them, the flickering candles casting shadows along the walls. Tonight, the world outside didn't exist. Tonight, there were no rules. Only them. Only this. Only the beginning of something they could never undo. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of the city below. A million lights flickered across the skyline, but on the rooftop of the Grand Royal, the world felt quiet, intimate. Just the two of them, suspended in a moment, neither of them could stop. Alexander Hunt stood near the edge, his hands resting on the cool metal railing as he gazed at the sprawling city beneath him. A man who owned everything. Yet tonight, nothing mattered more than the woman standing behind him. Alina. He could feel her presence even without looking, the warmth of her body, the way her breath hitched when the wind tousled her hair. She was close, but not close enough. Not yet. The sound of her heels against the stone floor sent a shiver of anticipation through him. "What are we doing, Alexander?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost in the breeze. His grip tightened on the railing. He had asked himself the same thing 100 times. He had fought it, tried to drown it in logic and reason. But tonight, he was done fighting. Turning slowly, he met her gaze. Her dark eyes reflected the city lights, filled with the same unspoken tension that had been tormenting him for weeks. "This," he murmured, stepping closer, "this is what we're doing." Alina exhaled shakily as he reached for her, his fingers skimming down the length of her bare arm. The touch was feather-light, but it sent fire through her veins. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to protest, to remind him that this was reckless, dangerous, but she didn't step away, and neither did he. With slow, deliberate movements, Alexander lifted a hand to her face, tracing his thumb along the curve of her cheek. "You drive me insane," he admitted, his voice rough with restraint. "Every second I'm near you, I feel like I'm losing control." Alina swallowed, her pulse hammering beneath his touch. "Then maybe we should stop." A dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. "Do you want to stop?" Silence. Then a soft, almost imperceptible shake of her head. That was all he needed. With a sharp inhale, Alexander closed the last inch between them, his lips hovering just near hers, close enough to steal her breath, close enough to make her tremble, but he didn't kiss her, not yet. Instead, he teased, brushing his lips just near the corner of her mouth, letting the warmth of his breath caress her skin. Alina shivered. He was torturing her, making her feel every ounce of the desire he had been holding back. "Say you want me," he murmured, his voice dripping with promise. Her hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to resist, to hold on to whatever was left of her sanity. But when his lips brushed against her jaw, a whisper of a touch, she exhaled one single, trembling word. Yes. The moment the word left her lips, everything changed. Alexander's restraint shattered. With a deep, hungry groan, he claimed her mouth in a kiss that sent the world spinning. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just raw, burning need. Alina gasped against his lips, her hands gripping his shirt as he pulled her closer, molding her against him. The city lights swirled around them, the cool night air forgotten as heat ignited between them. His fingers slid into her hair, tilting her head just enough to deepen the kiss. Slow at first, teasing, savoring, then desperate, urgent, like a man starved for too long. Alina melted into him, her body pressing against his as his hands roamed lower, tracing the curve of her waist, memorizing every inch of her. The rooftop disappeared. The rest of the world ceased to exist. It was just them, just this, as if nothing else had ever mattered. But then, a distant car horn shattered the silence. The sound was sharp, jarring, pulling them back to reality like a cold splash of water. Alina was the first to pull away, her breathing ragged, her lips swollen from his kisses. Alexander didn't let go. He held her there, his forehead resting against hers, as if he couldn't bear the thought of stepping back. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her voice shaking, his jaw clenched. He knew she was right. This wasn't just dangerous. This was a fire they wouldn't walk away from unscathed. And yet, his fingers tightened around her waist. "I don't care." Her breath hitched. She should care. She needed to care. But as she looked up at him, at the undeniable hunger in his eyes, she knew the truth. Neither of them could stop this now, no matter how dangerous it was. The days that followed their rooftop encounter were a whirlwind of stolen moments, whispered words, and reckless temptation. Alexander Hunt had never been a man who lost control. He thrived in discipline, in rules, in order. But with Alina, all of that unraveled, and he let it. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't just want something. He needed it. He needed her. In his office, the soft knock at the door sent a rush of anticipation through him. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Come in," he said, his voice smooth, controlled, on the surface. The door clicked open and then she was there. Alina Ray. Dressed in a fitted navy blue dress, her dark curls tumbling over her shoulders, her full lips pressed together as if she were trying to remind herself to breathe. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had told himself to keep his distance, to be professional. But the moment their eyes met, restraint became a distant memory. She stepped forward, placing a file on his desk. "These are the reports you—" "Lock the door," he interrupted. Her breath hitched. "Alexander," she warned softly. But he wasn't listening. He rose from his chair, rounding the desk until he was standing in front of her, invading her space, his fingers skimming down the length of her arm. "Lock the door, Alina." A shiver ran through her, but instead of resisting, she reached behind her, turning the lock with a quiet click. That was all he needed. In the next second, he had her pressed against the wall, his hands braced on either side of her, caging her in. Her scent, jasmine, and something uniquely her, wrapped around him, making it impossible to think of anything but the way she looked at him. Someone could walk in, she whispered, her voice trembling. His lips curved into a dangerous smirk. Then I guess we'll have to be quiet. Her eyes darkened, but just before he could capture her lips in a kiss, a sharp ring shattered the moment. His phone. Alexander cursed under his breath, glancing at the screen. The name flashing across it made his expression harden. It was a business call, one he couldn't ignore. Alina stepped away, smoothing her dress. The spell between them momentarily broken, and just like that, reality crept back in. Midnight phone calls. The night was quiet, the world outside her window bathed in moonlight. Alina lay in bed, her phone pressed to her ear, her fingers gripping the sheets as Alexander's voice wrapped around her like a velvet rope. "Tell me where you are," he murmured. She bit her lip. "In bed." A low hum of approval. "What are you wearing?" She exhaled sharply, heat rising to her cheeks. "Alexander, answer me." She closed her eyes. "A silk nightgown." Silence. Then his voice, lower, rougher. "I hate that I can't see you." Her heart clenched. "Then maybe we should stop this." A sharp inhale. "Do you want to stop?" She hesitated, and that was answer enough. His voice softened. "Go to sleep, Alina." Her chest ached. "Good night, Alexander." She hung up first, because she couldn't afford to fall any deeper. "Titutei, meta seis defies, spitzenschitschelsti." Inni. Alina stared at herself in the mirror, her reflection betraying the war inside her. What was she doing? This wasn't just an affair. This was madness. He was Alexander Hunt, powerful, untouchable, the kind of man who never needed anyone. What if she was just a game to him, a passing temptation? She knew men like him, knew how they moved on when the thrill was gone. But Alexander wasn't like any man she had ever known, and that terrified her more than anything. Alexander's battle. Alexander sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had lost control before, but never like this. Every second he spent away from Alina felt like an eternity. Every moment without her voice, without her touch, was a slow, burning agony. He was losing himself in her, and he didn't care. But there was something else, a fear creeping into his chest, because if he lost her, he wasn't sure he'd recover. As their secret love burned hotter, the danger of it grew stronger. They were walking on the edge of something uncontrollable, and soon someone was bound to get hurt. The office buzzed with its usual energy, phone calls, hurried footsteps, the sound of keyboards clicking away. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension brewed. Alexander Hunt was changing. Everyone noticed it, the stolen glances, the late-night meetings, the way his usually sharp focus wavered. And no one noticed more than Olivia Carter. She had worked her way up in Hunt Enterprises, climbing the corporate ladder with ruthless ambition. She had been by Alexander's side for years, waiting for him to see her, but now his attention was elsewhere, and she hated it. Olivia's suspicion. Standing outside Alexander's office, Olivia watched as his door closed behind Alina. Again, her nails dug into her palm. At first, she had brushed it off, an assistant delivering documents, nothing more. But the way Alexander's gaze lingered, the way his mood shifted after she left, it was unmistakable. This wasn't business, this was something else, and Olivia intended to find out exactly what. The private investigator. The dimly lit bar reeked of whiskey and bad decisions. Olivia slid into a corner booth, her manicured fingers tapping against the glass of untouched wine in front of her. A man slipped into the seat across from her. A private investigator she had hired before for discreet corporate dealings. "You found something?" she asked, keeping her voice low. He smirked, sliding an envelope across the table. "Oh, I found plenty." Olivia's pulse quickened as she opened it. Photographs spilled onto the table. Alexander and Alina in the hidden corridors of the office, a late-night rendezvous at the Grand Royale, a stolen kiss under the stars on the rooftop. Every image screamed affair. Olivia's lips curled into a wicked smile. Finally, she had proof, and now she had power. The confrontation. The next morning, Olivia strode into Alexander's office without knocking. He barely looked up. "What do you want?" She placed the envelope on his desk. "I think you should open it." His jaw tightened. The way she said it, something was off. Slowly, he picked up the envelope, flipping it open. And then the world shifted. Photo after photo, staring back at him like a trap, snapping shut. A muscle in his jaw ticked. "Where did you get these?" Olivia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "That doesn't matter. What does matter is what I plan to do with them." Alexander's grip on the photos tightened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Olivia." She chuckled. "Oh, I know. But you're the one who broke the rules." He stood, towering over her, his voice sharp as steel. "What do you want?" She tilted her head. "That's the question, isn't it? If these photos get out, your reputation takes a hit. She loses her job. Maybe even more." His blood turned to ice. Alina. She wasn't just playing with him. She was playing with Alina's life. "I could take these to the board," Olivia continued, circling him like a predator. "Or the press. A scandal like this, it would be everywhere." Alexander clenched his fists. He had fought against ruthless competitors, taken down entire corporations. But this was personal. This was war. "What do you want?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Olivia smiled. "I think you already know." She wanted him. Alina's fear. Alina's hands trembled as she held the photos. Alexander had given them to her the moment he walked into her apartment, his face unreadable. Her stomach twisted. "Who took these?" "Olivia." His voice was tight with rage. "She had us followed." Alina swallowed hard. "What does she want?" Silence. And then he met her gaze. "She wants me to end this." A sharp pain stabbed through her chest. Of course, she had always known this couldn't last. She had just hoped, foolishly, that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Alexander reached for her, his hands warm, firm, steady. "I won't let her control us." Alina forced a bitter smile. "You can't stop her, Alexander. She has proof, and you have a reputation to protect." He exhaled harshly. "Damn my reputation. I won't lose you." Her breath caught. For a moment, she let herself believe him. But deep down, fear whispered in her ear. This wasn't just about love. This was a war. And wars had casualties. The beginning of the end. As the night deepened, Alexander sat in his penthouse, whiskey in hand, staring at the city that had once been his kingdom. Now it was a battlefield, and Olivia had fired the first shot, but she had underestimated him, because Alexander Hunt didn't lose, and he sure as hell wasn't going to lose her. The city lights blurred behind the glass windows of Alexander's office, but his world had never felt darker. He stood near his desk, gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles turned white. Alina stood in front of him, confusion flickering in her deep, beautiful eyes. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander forced himself to meet her gaze, even as every instinct screamed at him to take it back, to tell her the truth. But he couldn't. Not if he wanted to protect her. Not if he wanted to save her from the storm Olivia had unleashed. "It was just an affair, Alina," he said coldly. Her breath hitched, as if he had struck her. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to laugh and tell her this was some cruel joke. But he didn't. Because he couldn't. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling. "You're lying." He clenched his jaw. "I'm not." Her eyes searched his face, desperate, pleading. "You told me you—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together, as if saying the words out loud would break her. Alexander turned away. He couldn't bear to look at her. If he did, he might break first. "This was never supposed to be serious," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "It was fun while it lasted. But it's over now." Alina let out a shaky breath. "You don't mean that." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "I do." A sharp, broken laugh escaped her lips. "Wow." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "You're really doing this?" He forced himself to hold her gaze. "Yes." Her face crumpled. "Why?" Because Olivia would destroy her. Because the world he lived in was cruel and unforgiving. Because if he didn't do this, she would lose everything. But he couldn't say any of that. So instead, he delivered the final blow. "I don't love you, Alina." Silence. Then a sharp gasp, and just like that, the light in her eyes went out. She took a step back, as if physically recoiling from him. Alexander wanted to reach for her, to take it all back, to tell her the truth, that he did love her, that he had never loved anyone the way he loved her. But it was too late. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "I was stupid to think you were different." He didn't answer. He couldn't. She let out a bitter laugh, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "I should have known." She turned on her heel, walking toward the door. For a split second, he almost called her back. But he didn't, because this was the only way to protect her. The door slammed behind her, and with it, the last piece of his soul shattered. Alina's disappearance. Alina moved through her apartment like a ghost, packing her belongings with numb fingers. Her heart felt hollow, her chest aching with every breath. How could she have been so stupid? She had let herself believe he cared, that he loved her, but it had all been a lie, just an affair, just a game. A fresh wave of pain hit her and she pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back a sob. She couldn't stay here, not in this city, not where everything reminded her of him. With a deep, shaky breath, she grabbed her suitcase and walked out of her apartment, out of his life. Alexander's realization. The office felt colder without her. Days passed, but Alexander couldn't focus. He went through the motions, meetings, deals, boardroom negotiations, but his mind was elsewhere, with her. Her scent still lingered in his office, in the corridors where they had stolen kisses. He still caught himself reaching for his phone, wanting to hear her voice. But she was gone, and it was his fault. A sharp knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Olivia stepped in, her signature smirk in place. "I heard Alina resigned. Guess she couldn't handle the truth." Rage simmered beneath his skin, but he kept his expression blank. "Get out," he said, quietly. Olivia arched a brow. "Excuse me?" His eyes darkened, his voice like ice. "I said get out." She faltered for the first time. "Alexander, you wanted to win, Olivia. Congratulations, you won." He took a slow, measured step toward her. "But if you ever interfere in my personal life again, you'll regret it." Her smirk vanished. For the first time, she saw it. The raw, dangerous fury in his eyes. She had expected victory, expected him to move on, but she had underestimated just how deeply Alexander Hunt had fallen. And now she had made him desperate. The breaking point. That night, Alexander sat in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury, wealth, and power, and he had never felt more empty. He had done the unthinkable. He had let her go. He had pushed her away. And now she was gone. His hands clenched into fists. He had made the worst mistake of his life, and he would do whatever it took to fix it. The collapse. Alexander Hunt was a man who never lost control. Until now. Since the day Alina walked out of his life, he had become a shadow of himself. His world, the empire he had built with ruthless precision, was crumbling. Meetings blurred together, reports went unread, decisions were made without his usual sharpness. His temper had grown short, his patience non-existent, and everyone noticed. At board meetings, his executives exchanged wary glances, murmuring about his uncharacteristic distractions. His assistant hesitated before handing him schedules, afraid of his cold, clipped responses. Even Olivia, usually smug in her victory, now avoided his stormy presence. He had what he wanted. The scandal had been avoided. His reputation remained intact. And yet, his nights were restless, haunted by the memory of Alina's voice, the way she had looked at him when he had shattered her heart. Her absence was suffocating. One evening, he sat in his penthouse, drowning in whiskey, staring at the city lights that once made him feel untouchable. Now, they meant nothing, because without her nothing did. With a sudden burst of fury, he hurled the glass against the wall, watching it shatter into 1,000 pieces, just like him, just like them. He had made a mistake, and he was going to fix it, even if it meant burning his world down. The search begins. Alexander wasted no time. He had the resources to find anyone, anywhere, and he would find her. The first place he checked was her apartment. Empty. Her landlord mentioned she had broken her lease and left in a hurry. Next, he checked her friends. They refused to tell him anything, their gazes filled with contempt. "Haven't you hurt her enough?" one of them snapped. His jaw clenched. "Where is she?" "She doesn't want to be found." That only fueled his determination. Days turned into weeks. His private investigator worked around the clock, tracking every lead, every possible place she could have gone. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A small town, a quiet place, miles away from the city. She had run, but she couldn't hide from him. Finding her, the town was the opposite of everything Alexander knew. No towering skyscrapers, no flashing city lights, just open streets, small cafes, and a slower rhythm of life. It was peaceful. And she was here. He spotted her before she saw him. She was standing outside a bookstore, flipping through a novel, her dark curls cascading down her back. She looked different, softer, dressed in a casual sweater and jeans. She looked free. For a moment, he hesitated. What if she was better off without him? But then she turned, and he saw it. The sadness in her eyes, the lingering pain that mirrored his own. She wasn't free. She was just surviving, and he couldn't let that continue. The confrontation. Alina froze the moment she saw him. For a long, painful second, neither of them moved. Then her eyes hardened, and she turned to walk away. But Alexander was faster. He reached for her wrist, his grip firm, but not forceful. "Alina, wait!" She yanked her arm away, her voice sharp. "Why are you here?" His throat tightened. "Because I made a mistake." She let out a bitter laugh. A mistake. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. You destroyed me, Alexander. Guilt slammed into him. I know. She shook her head, stepping back. You don't get to just show up here and fix everything. You chose to let me go. I had to. His voice broke slightly. I thought I was protecting you. Alina's jaw clenched. By lying. By making me feel like I meant nothing? He swallowed hard. I couldn't let Olivia ruin your life. If I fought back, she would have exposed everything. She would have made sure you lost your job, your career. I lost everything anyway, she snapped, her voice thick with emotion. I lost you. Silence. The weight of her words settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Alexander took a slow step forward. Alina. She turned away, crossing her arms over her chest. Go home, Alexander. No. His voice was firm, unwavering. Not without you. She exhaled shakily, as if trying to steady herself. You don't get to decide that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then tell me you don't love me. Her breath hitched. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Alexander's heart pounded. He reached for her, his fingers gently grazing hers. Say it, Alina, he murmured. Say you don't love me, and I'll walk away. She clenched her fists. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. His voice was rough, desperate. Because if you still love me, then I will fix this. I will fight for you. I don't care about Olivia. I don't care about the board. I don't care about the scandal. Her eyes searched his, filled with doubt, longing, and a war she was fighting within herself. I will burn everything down for you, he vowed. Just say the word. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She shook her head. But she didn't tell him to leave. She didn't tell him she didn't love him. And that was all the hope he needed. This wasn't over, not yet, not ever. The ultimatum Alexander Hunt had played many dangerous games in his life. Mergers, acquisitions, cutthroat deals. He had faced them all without fear. But this time, the stakes were different. This time he was fighting for her, and to do that, he had to destroy the one person who had driven her away. Olivia. Sitting in his office, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled as he watched the woman across from him. Olivia smirked, crossing her legs as she sipped her expensive wine. So, what's this about, Alexander? Finally ready to admit I was right? He said nothing, his piercing gaze locked on hers. She sighed dramatically. Look, I did you a favor. That girl, Alina, she wasn't right for you. You belong with someone like us, someone who— Enough, he interrupted, his voice low and lethal. Olivia blinked, surprised at the cold steel in his tone. Alexander leaned forward, sliding a folder across the desk. You think you won, Olivia, but you forgot one thing. She hesitated before picking it up. When she opened it, her face paled. Inside were documents, emails and hidden transactions, evidence of her scandals. Alexander's lips curled into a smirk. You've been very careless. Olivia swallowed hard. Where did you get this? He tilted his head. Does it matter? Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. This is nothing. Oh, it's everything. He leaned back. Fraud, embezzlement, manipulation of company stocks. Need I go on? Olivia's mask of confidence cracked. What do you want? She whispered. His expression turned deadly. You're going to back off. You will never speak of Alina again. You will never interfere in my life again. If you do— He gestured to the folder. This goes public. Her eyes burned with fury. You would ruin me. I will ruin you, he corrected, if you give me a reason. Silence. Then, with a clenched jaw, Olivia threw the folder back onto the desk. Fine, she spat. Have your little love story, but don't think this makes us even. Alexander smirked. Oh, we were never even, Olivia. You just lost. She stormed out, and as the door slammed shut, Alexander exhaled. The threat was gone. Now it was time to win back the woman he had lost. Waiting in the rain. The rain poured relentlessly, soaking Alexander to the bone. He didn't care. He stood outside Alina's small apartment, his heart pounding against his ribs. She was inside. He knew it. But she hadn't answered his calls, hadn't responded to his messages, and so he waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The cold bit at his skin, but the pain in his chest was far worse, and still she didn't come out. Finally the door opened. Alina stepped onto the porch, freezing when she saw him. Her eyes widened, taking in his drenched form. Alexander. His throat tightened at the sound of her voice. Alina. She folded her arms, her expression guarded. What are you doing here? He took a shaky breath. I had to see you. She glanced at the rain. You've been standing here all night. Yes. Her lips parted in shock. Are you crazy? He let out a breathless laugh. For you, absolutely. She looked away, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. You shouldn't be here. He stepped forward, his voice raw with emotion. I had to come. I had to tell you. I fixed it. Olivia is gone. She can't hurt you anymore. Alina's eyes snapped back to his, searching for the truth. What did you do? I ended it. His jaw tightened. I made sure she can never touch us again. She swallowed hard. Why? His chest ached and... Because I love you. Her breath hitched. He took another step closer. I was a coward, Alina. I pushed you away because I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was destroy both of us. She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander... He reached for her hands, his fingers brushing against hers. Give me one last chance. His voice broke. Please. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the rain. I don't know if I can trust you again. His grip tightened, desperate. Then let me earn it. Silence stretched between them, the rain falling around them like a curtain. Then slowly, hesitantly, Alina placed her hand over his, and for the first time in weeks, hope surged through him. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. A love that won't die. Alina's heart pounded as she stood before Alexander, the rain-soaked night still clinging to her skin. His words echoed in her mind. Give me one last chance, please. She had sworn she wouldn't let him back in, sworn she wouldn't fall for his charm, his beautiful lies, his intoxicating presence. But standing there, feeling the warmth of his hands despite the cold, she realized something terrifying. She had never stopped loving him, not for a single second, but love wasn't enough, not after the pain he had put her through. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. Alexander stepped closer, his fingers brushing against her cheek with infinite tenderness. Then let me prove it to you. She shivered, not from the rain, but from the intensity in his gaze, the desperation, the longing. Alexander, I love you, Alina. His voice was raw, stripped of all pride, all arrogance. I love you so much it's killing me. Tears welled in her eyes. You broke me. I know. His voice cracked. And I will spend the rest of my life making it right. Silence. She should walk away, she should. But when his hand cupped her face, when his thumb brushed away a raindrop, or was it a tear, something inside her shattered. She'd been fighting this for so long. She was tired, and the truth was, she wanted him, not just wanted, needed. A kiss that changes everything. Alexander saw the moment she stopped fighting, the moment her walls cracked just enough. He didn't hesitate. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that held everything, his regret, his longing, his devotion. The moment their mouths met, the world around them disappeared. The rain, the cold, the past. None of it mattered. Alina melted into him, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, her lips parting as a soft moan escaped her throat. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, as if he could fuse them together and never let go again. The kiss was desperate, hungry, but also slow, savoring, memorizing, worshipping. It wasn't just passion, it was a vow, a promise. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, Alexander pressed his forehead to hers. "I will never hide you again," he murmured. "I don't care about the world, the board, or anyone else." He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her swollen lips. "You are everything to me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. He kissed them away. "Say you'll give me a chance," he whispered. "Say you'll let me love you the way you deserve." Her lips trembled. And then, in the quiet of the night, she gave him the only answer that mattered. Yes. The night of no regrets. Alexander wasted no time. He swept her into his arms, carrying her inside before she could protest. The moment the door closed behind them, he pinned her against it, his body pressing into hers, his lips claiming hers once more. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only love. His hands roamed her body, memorizing every curve, every soft moan he pulled from her lips. He kissed her deeply, hungrily, as if making up for all the nights he had spent without her. "Tell me you're mine," he murmured against her neck, his breath hot against her skin. Alina clutched his shirt, pulling him closer. "I was always yours." A groan rumbled from his chest as he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom. The candlelight flickered, casting golden shadows as they fell onto the bed, tangled together in a desperate embrace. The night stretched on, filled with whispered promises, lingering kisses, and a passion that burned brighter than ever. A new beginning. As dawn broke, Alina lay against Alexander's chest, his arms wrapped around her like a shield. She traced lazy circles on his bare skin, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. He kissed the top of her head. "Stay with me," he murmured. She smiled softly, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "I already said yes," he exhaled, his grip tightening. "I just needed to hear it again." Alina laughed, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "Then you better get used to hearing it." A slow, genuine smile spread across Alexander's face, the kind she had never seen before. The kind that told her he wasn't just saying words this time, he meant them. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe in him. Believe in them. The announcement that shakes the world. The morning after their passionate reunion, Alexander woke with Alina curled against his chest, her warmth seeping into him like sunlight. He tightened his arms around her, unwilling to let go. But today he had to. Today he would change everything. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I have something to do." She stirred, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. "What is it?" He cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "I'm going to tell the world about us." Her breath hitched. "Alexander." "No more hiding," he whispered. "I meant what I said, Alina. I will never let anyone come between us again." 1,000 emotions flickered in her eyes. Hope, fear, love. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." By noon, the press conference was set. The board members tried to stop him. His PR team panicked. Even his family called, warning him that this would be the biggest scandal of his career. But Alexander didn't care. Dressed in a sharp black suit, he stood at the podium in front of flashing cameras, his expression unreadable. Whispers filled the room as reporters anticipated a typical corporate announcement. They were wrong. Alexander cleared his throat, his voice steady as he spoke. There have been many rumors surrounding my personal life recently. His piercing blue eyes scanned the crowd. Today, I am here to confirm them. A hush fell over the room. He took a deep breath. I am in love with Alina Ray. Gasps erupted. Reporters scrambled for their microphones. I know this may come as a shock to some, he continued, and I know there will be backlash, but I don't care. His voice hardened. For years, I've lived by the expectations of society, choosing status over happiness, reputation over truth, but not anymore. Flashes exploded as journalists shouted questions. What about your investors? Will this affect your leadership? What does your family think? Alexander silenced them with a single glare. My company will thrive because of my work, not because of who I love. His jaw tightened. And as for my family, they will either stand with me or they will watch me build a new legacy without them. Silence. Then, the first headline went live. Billionaire CEO Alexander Hunt declares love for brown-skinned beauty, defies elite expectations. The world erupted. Social media exploded with debates. Investors panicked. The board held emergency meetings trying to control the narrative. But worst of all, his own family turned against him. His father called, his voice cold. You're making a mistake, Alexander. No, he said firmly. I'm fixing one. His mother sighed. She's not our kind, son. Alexander clenched his jaw. You mean she's not white? Silence. His mother hesitated. The world will never accept this. Then I'll change the world. And with that, he hung up. Meanwhile, Olivia watched everything unfold with growing rage. She had lost. But she wasn't going down alone. She leaked one last attempt at scandal, emails, rumors, manipulations, trying to destroy Alexander and Alina in the public eye. What she didn't expect was Alexander's counterattack. The moment her accusations went live, he struck back with undeniable proof of her embezzlement. Within hours, Olivia was fired, sued, and banned from the corporate world forever. As she packed her things from her office, security escorting her out, she muttered, "You'll regret this, Alexander." He simply smirked. "The only thing I regret is not ending your games sooner." With that, Olivia Hunt was erased from high society. As the storm raged outside, Alina watched the news from her apartment. She saw the backlash, the protests, the journalists camping outside Alexander's mansion, and she was terrified. This was too big, too dangerous. When Alexander arrived at her door, she hesitated before letting him in. "You did all this for me?" she whispered. He cupped her face. "I did this for us. But the world is against you now." He smiled softly. "Then let them come." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't want you to lose everything." He pulled her into his arms. "The only thing I can't lose is you." She buried her face in his chest, finally allowing herself to believe. No more fear, no more hiding, only love. A love that defied the odds. The city skyline shimmered under the moonlight, casting a silver glow over the private garden Alexander had prepared. A pathway lined with thousands of roses led to a candlelit pavilion where a single table awaited. Alina stood at the entrance, breathless. The night air was cool, but warmth spread through her chest as she took in the breathtaking setup. The soft melody of a violin played in the distance, blending with the rustling of leaves. She turned to Alexander, her heart pounding. "What is this?" His piercing blue eyes softened as he reached for her hand. "A beginning." He led her to the table, pulling out her chair like a perfect gentleman. As she sat, he took the seat across from her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know things have been chaotic," he said, his voice low. "I know the world has tried to tear us apart. But tonight, none of that matters." She swallowed hard. "Alexander," he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I fought for my company. I fought against the world. But the greatest battle I ever fought was for you." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Alina, I used to think love was just a strategy, a calculated move. But you," his voice faltered, raw with emotion, "you turned my entire world upside down." Tears pricked her eyes. He inhaled sharply, then stood, pulling something from his pocket. And then he dropped to one knee. Alina gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The world seemed to stop as Alexander held out a velvet box, flipping it open to reveal a dazzling diamond ring. Under the moonlight, his voice was a whisper. No more secrets, no more fear. Just us. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Marry me, Alina." His voice was thick with emotion. "Be my forever." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The moment the word left her lips, he surged forward, pulling her into his arms. His lips crashed against hers, and the world melted away. The applause of the violinist, the candlelight flickering in the breeze, the stars witnessing their love, none of it mattered. Only him, only them. Passion that burned, brighter than ever. As the night deepened, Alexander carried her inside his penthouse, his arms holding her as if he would never let go. The moment they entered, he kicked the door shut and pinned her against it. His hands traced her curves, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, worshipping. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, pressing kisses down her neck. "I will love you every single day of my life." Alina melted beneath his touch, her fingers slipping into his hair, pulling him closer. She had fought this, resisted it, but now she surrendered to love, to him. The night stretched on, filled with whispered promises, passionate embraces, and a love that refused to be hidden any longer. A future, together. Months later, on a sunlit afternoon, Alexander and Alina stood in front of the world, exchanging vows. The same media that had once tried to tear them apart now captured the greatest love story ever told. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, his voice was steady, unwavering. "You are my heart, my soul, my forever." Tears streamed down Alina's face as she whispered back, "And you are mine." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the world erupted in cheers. What once had been forbidden was now celebrated. And as Alexander held her close, he knew he had finally found his greatest success. Not his empire, not his wealth, but her, the love of his life.